"You don't belong here," the guard said, his voice low but firm, the kind that didn't need to be loud to humiliate someone. And for a second, Lily Carter didn't respond, her hand still wrapped around the handle of a cleaning cart that squeaked softly against the polished marble floor, her reflection faint beneath the chandelier light that cost more than she made in a year. And maybe he was right, because everything about this place, the gold-trimmed walls, the crystal glasses, the quiet confidence of people who had never worried about rent, felt like a world she had only ever seen through glass, not lived in. But still, she held her ground just long enough to whisper, "I'm just finishing my shift." Even though she knew that wasn't really the point, because tonight wasn't just another shift. Tonight the building had transformed into something else entirely, a private gala on the top floor. The kind of event where names were recognized and mistakes were not forgiven, and she had made one simply by being seen, by stepping too close to a space that wasn't meant for her. The guard reaching for her elbow, not roughly, just enough to guide her away, to erase her quietly, when a voice cut through the air, calm, precise, and unmistakably in control. "Let her stay." And everything paused. The guard froze mid-motion. Guests turned slightly without meaning to, and Lily felt it before she saw him. The shift in attention, the weight of presence. And when she finally looked up, Ethan Blake was already watching her, not with annoyance or curiosity, but with something harder to read, something that made her chest tighten for reasons she didn't understand. Because men like him didn't notice people like her. Not really. Not unless there was a problem to fix or a mistake to correct. And yet here he was, the CEO of Blake Holdings, standing at the edge of a room filled with million-dollar conversations. Telling security to let a cleaner stay, the guard stepped back. Immediately, murmuring an apology that wasn't meant for her, and Lily nodded once, quickly, keeping her eyes down as she pushed her cart forward, trying to disappear again, because disappearing was something she was good at. It was how she survived, how she worked unnoticed through late-night shifts, how she avoided questions she didn't want to answer, how she kept her past exactly where it belonged, hidden beneath routine and silence. But as she moved past the glass doors leading into the gala, she felt his gaze follow her, steady, deliberate, like he was trying to solve something. And she hated that feeling, hated being seen in a way that wasn't surface level, because surface level was safe, predictable, manageable, and anything deeper meant risk, meant exposure, meant someone might start asking the wrong questions. Questions like why a cleaner carried a pen tucked behind her ear like a habit she couldn't break, or why her cart had a folded stack of papers hidden beneath the supplies, or why, just the night before, she had quietly corrected a structural calculation on a discarded blueprint left in a conference room. A mistake that would have cost the company millions if it had gone unnoticed. She hadn't meant to get involved, she never did. But numbers had always spoken to her louder than instructions, and fixing things had once been her future, not just her instinct. She had erased her notes before anyone could trace them, wiped the evidence clean like she always did, but she hadn't realized someone had seen, someone who now stood less than 20 feet away, watching the one person in the building who wasn't supposed to matter. And for the first time that night, as Lily Carter pushed her cart into the shadows of a place that didn't want her, she felt something shift, subtle but undeniable, like the moment before a door opens, like the quiet warning that whatever she had managed to keep hidden all this time was about to be found. People only see what you let them see, Lily whispered to herself later that night, her voice barely audible over the hum of the industrial vacuum as she moved through the empty corridor on the 32nd floor, long after the gala music had faded and the guests had disappeared into black cars and private elevators, leaving behind nothing but fingerprints on glass and half-finished conversations lingering in the air. And for a moment, everything felt normal again, predictable, safe, the way she needed it to be, because the version of her that belonged in rooms like that had been buried a long time ago, replaced by someone quieter, someone who kept her head down and her hands busy, someone who knew that survival sometimes meant becoming invisible. She guided the vacuum along the edge of the hallway, her movements precise, almost rhythmic, like she was following a pattern only she understood. And when she reached the end of the corridor, she paused, glancing toward the conference room where the lights were still on, a detail most people would ignore, but Lily never ignored details. That was her problem. Or maybe it had once been her strength. She hesitated, then stepped inside, Her cart left just outside the door. The room smelled faintly of coffee and expensive cologne. The table scattered with printed reports and a large blueprint stretched across the center. And she did not mean to look. She never meant to look, but her eyes moved anyway, drawn to the lines, the measurements, the tiny inconsistencies that stood out like noise in an otherwise perfect design. She leaned closer, just for a second, her fingers brushing against the edge of the paper as she scanned the layout. And there it was, a miscalculation so small it would pass unnoticed until it was too late. Until it cost time, money, reputation. She exhaled slowly, reaching for the pen behind her ear without thinking. The motion automatic, familiar, like muscle. Memory she could not erase, and in a matter of seconds, she corrected it. A quick adjustment, a note in the margin, nothing dramatic, just enough to make it right. Then she froze, the reality settling in. She should not have touched it. She knew better. Her heart picked up as she quickly erased the mark, smoothing the paper as if nothing had happened, stepping back, forcing herself to breathe. But something felt different this time, like the room was no longer empty, like the silence had shifted. She turned slowly, and there he was, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with that same unreadable expression. Ethan Blake had not made a sound, had not announced himself. He had simply been there, observing, and for a second, neither of them spoke. The distance between them filled with everything she did not want to explain, everything he had just seen. "You missed a spot," he said finally, his tone calm, almost casual, but his eyes did not move from her face. Lily swallowed, forcing a small nod as she stepped past him, reaching for her cart. "I will fix it," she replied, her voice steady in a way she did not quite feel. And she could sense it now, the shift she had tried to ignore earlier. This was no longer just a job, no longer just another night. Because people like Ethan Blake did not stand in doorways watching cleaners correct blueprints. They did not notice details unless those details mattered, and for reasons she could not yet understand, she had just become one of them. "You are not just cleaning, are you?" Ethan said the next night, his voice cutting through the quiet before Lily even realized he was there again. And this time she did not flinch, but she did not turn around either, her hands continuing their slow, methodical motion as she wiped down the long glass conference table, each stroke deliberate, controlled, like if she just kept moving, kept focusing on the surface in front of her, the question would somehow disappear, but it did not. It lingered in the air between them, steady and patient, the way he seemed to be, and after a few seconds, she set the cloth down, straightening just enough to face him without fully meeting his eyes. "I am doing my job," she replied, her tone neutral, carefully measured, the kind of answer that closed doors instead of opening them. But Ethan did not move, did not accept the boundary she had just placed. Instead, he stepped into the room, his shoes quiet against the polished floor, his gaze briefly drifting to the blueprint on the table, the same one from the night before, now corrected, finalized, approved. "You fixed it," he said, not as a question, and Lily felt that familiar tightening in her chest, the one that came when something she had buried tried to surface. "I cleaned around it," she answered quickly, but even to her own ears, it sounded thin, unconvincing, because both of them knew that was not what had happened, and the silence that followed stretched just long enough to feel dangerous. Ethan studied her for a moment, not with suspicion, but with curiosity sharpened into focus, like he was putting pieces together in real time. And then, almost casually, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded set of documents, placing them on the table between them. "There is a mistake in these," he said, stepping back slightly, giving her space, but not looking away. Lily glanced down despite herself. Just a quick look. That was all she intended, just enough to confirm and move on. But the moment her eyes scanned the page, she saw it immediately, a structural inconsistency buried beneath layers of numbers and projections, subtle, complex, the kind of error that only stood out if you knew exactly where to look. And her fingers twitched at her side, the instinct to fix it rising before she could stop it. She clenched her hand instead, forcing herself to stay still. "You should have your team review it," she said, her voice quieter now, less certain. Ethan did not respond right away, and when she finally looked up, he was watching her more closely than before, not testing her anymore, but waiting, giving her a choice she did not want, because this was how it started, not with a big reveal, not with some dramatic moment, but with small cracks, small decisions that slowly pulled the truth into the light. And Lily had spent years making sure that did not happen, years building a life where no one asked questions, where no one expected anything from her beyond what they saw. But standing there, with the evidence sitting inches away and his attention fixed on her like it mattered, she felt something shift again, something she could not control, and before she could stop herself, she reached for the pen behind her ear, the movement slow this time, almost reluctant, and leaned forward just enough to mark the page, a single correction, precise and confident, like she had done it 1,000 times before. Then she stepped back immediately, as if distance could undo what had just happened. The room fell quiet again, heavier now, charged with something unspoken. Ethan glanced down at the correction, then back at her, and this time there was no mistaking it, no uncertainty in his expression, just a clear, undeniable recognition of what she had tried so hard to hide. "That is not something you learn from cleaning floors," he said softly, and Lily looked at him then, really looked, her guard slipping just for a second, enough to reveal the truth she could not say out loud, before she caught herself and turned away, pushing her cart toward the door, because she already knew what came next. Once someone saw you clearly, they did not forget, and she had just given him a reason to keep looking. "You should be careful what you show people," Lily said quietly the following evening, though she was not entirely sure if she was warning him or herself, her voice steady but softer than usual as she adjusted the supplies on her cart near the executive floor, the fluorescent lights humming faintly above while the rest of the building settled into its late-night rhythm, predictable, distant, safe. But nothing about the past 24 hours had felt safe, not since she had made that single correction in front of him, not since she had allowed something real to surface. And now it was too late to pretend it had not happened, because people like Ethan Blake did not forget things like that. They did not overlook anomalies, they studied them. And she could feel it even without turning around, the quiet presence approaching again, unhurried, deliberate, as if he already knew exactly where she would be. "Then maybe you should stop showing them," he replied, stopping just a few feet behind her, his tone calm, almost conversational. But there was something sharper beneath it now, something more certain, and Lily closed her eyes for a brief second before turning to face him, her expression composed, guarded, the version of herself she had practiced for years sliding back into place. "I did not show you anything," she said, but the words lacked conviction, and they both knew it. Ethan studied her for a moment, then glanced at the hallway around them, empty, quiet, before stepping closer, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment feel private without being secretive. "You corrected a multi-million-dollar design error in under 10 seconds, he said, not accusing, not praising, just stating a fact. And Lily felt that familiar tension return, the invisible line she had drawn around her life being crossed again. "Anyone can get lucky," she replied, reaching for a bottle of cleaner just to give her hands something to do. But Ethan did not respond to that. Instead, he reached into his jacket once more, this time pulling out a thin file, worn at the edges like it had been handled more than once, and placed it gently on top of her cart, not forcing it into her space, just leaving it there. "Lily Carter," he said, her name sounding different in his voice, more intentional. "Top of your class at Stanford, structural engineering, full scholarship, withdrew 2 years before graduation." Her hand froze mid-motion, the bottle slipping slightly in her grip before she steadied it, her breath catching in a way she could not hide this time, because this was not observation anymore. This was discovery, real and complete. And for a moment, she did not move, did not speak, just stood there as everything she had tried to bury surfaced all at once. The long nights, the sacrifices, the quiet decision to walk away from a future she had worked for her entire life. "You have no right," she said finally, her voice low, controlled. But the edge was there now, unmistakable. Ethan did not step back, did not apologize, but he did not push either, his expression shifting slightly, less analytical now, more human. "I did not dig to expose you," he said. "I looked because I needed to understand." Lily let out a small, disbelieving breath, shaking her head as she pushed the file back toward him. "Understand what?" Exactly, she asked, her eyes finally meeting his fully. The guard gone, replaced by something more raw, more honest. Why someone who had everything would choose this, he answered, and for a second, the question hung between them, heavy with implication, because to him, it did not make sense, it could not make sense, and that was the problem. He was still looking at her like a puzzle to solve, not a person who had already made her choices. I did not choose this, she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them, and the truth in them shifted something in the air, subtle but real. Ethan noticed it, of course he did. But this time, he did not press further, did not demand answers. Instead, he nodded once, slowly, like he understood that whatever story she carried was not his to take apart, at least not yet. And as Lily turned away again, gripping the handle of her card a little tighter than before, she realized something she had not allowed herself to admit until now. He was not going to let this go, not because he wanted control, but because he had already seen too much, and once someone saw the truth behind the surface, there was no going back to pretending it was not there. If you wanted me to quit, you could have just said so, Lily said the next morning, her voice calm, but edged with something heavier, something that had been building since the moment he placed that file in front of her. And now the words came out before she could stop them, standing near the service elevator with her cart beside her, the early light filtering through the tall glass windows of the lobby, turning everything pale and quiet, a different world from the polished nights above. And, for the first time, she was not working late. She was working early, trying to avoid him, to return to a version of routine that no longer existed. But Ethan Blake did not operate on routines, he operated on decisions. And this one had clearly already been made. If I wanted you to quit, you would not be here right now, he replied evenly, stepping into her path just enough to make sure she could not pretend she had not seen him, his tone not confrontational, not commanding, just certain, and that certainty made her more uneasy than anything else, because it meant he was not reacting. He was planning. Lily exhaled slowly, tightening her grip on the handle of her cart. Then what do you want? She asked. And there it was, the question she had been avoiding, the one that mattered, because whatever he said next would change everything. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced around the nearly empty lobby, then back at her, as if weighing how much to say and how much to hold back. I want to understand why someone who could be leading a project is choosing to clean up after one, he said finally, and Lily let out a short, humorless breath, shaking her head. You keep saying that like it is a choice, she replied, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity now, the kind that did not come from anger, but from something deeper, something lived through. Sometimes it is just what is left. The words landed between them, simple, unadorned, and for a moment, neither of them moved, because that was the truth he had not considered, not fully, not until now. Ethan studied her again, but this time there was no calculation behind it, no silent test. Just a recognition that whatever path had brought her here was not something he could reduce to logic. Come with me, he said after a moment, turning toward the elevators without waiting for an answer. And Lily did not move, her instincts pulling her in the opposite direction, toward distance, toward safety, toward everything she understood. I am working, she said, but the excuse felt thin even as she said it. Ethan pressed the button, the elevator doors sliding open with a quiet chime. So am I, he replied, stepping inside and holding the door, not forcing, just waiting, giving her the same choice he had given her the night before. And that was what unsettled her the most. He was not demanding anything. He was offering, and offers were harder to refuse, because they came with the possibility of something more, something she had spent years avoiding. Lily hesitated for a long second, her mind running through every reason she should walk away, every rule she had set for herself about staying invisible, about not stepping into spaces where she did not belong. But then she looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she did not see a CEO or a stranger trying to solve her. She saw someone who had already decided she was worth understanding, and that was more dangerous than anything else, because it made her want to believe it. Just a little, she stepped forward slowly, pushing her cart aside, and entered the elevator, the doors closing behind her with a soft finality that felt louder than it should have. And as the elevator began to rise, carrying her toward a floor she had never been invited to before, Lily realized that whatever came next, there was no returning to the version of her life where no one asked questions, because now someone finally had, and he was not going to stop until he heard the answer. "You built this before, did you not?" Ethan said as the elevator doors opened into a quiet executive floor that felt entirely different from the rest of the building. Softer lighting, thicker carpet, the kind that muted every step, as if even sound had to be controlled up here, and Lily stepped out slowly, her eyes taking in the glass walls, the skyline stretching beyond them, a view she had only ever seen from reflections below, not from this height, not from this side of the glass, and for a moment she said nothing, because the question was not really about the room or the building. It was about her, about the version of herself she had left behind, the one he was now pulling back into the light. Ethan walked ahead, setting a folder down on a long table, the same calm precision in his movements. But now there was something else layered beneath it. Intention. "Sit," he said, not as an order, but as an invitation. And Lily hesitated, standing there with her arms slightly folded, like she needed something to hold on to, something to remind herself she still had control. But eventually she stepped forward and sat, the chair softer than she expected, sinking just enough to make her feel out of place. Ethan opened the folder, turning it toward her, and inside were multiple design layouts, financial projections, timelines, all tied to a single large-scale project, something bigger than anything she had seen in years. "This is where the error was," he said, pointing to a section she already recognized, her eyes scanning the page quickly, automatically, the way they used to, and she hated how natural it felt, how easy it was to fall back into this mindset, because it reminded her of everything she had given up. "You already fixed it," she replied quietly, but Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, I corrected what you showed me, but that is not the same as understanding why you saw it in the first place." Lily leaned back slightly, her fingers pressing together, grounding herself. "You do not need me for that," she said. But even as she spoke, she knew he was not going to accept that answer. Not anymore. Ethan rested his hands lightly on the table, his gaze steady. "I think I do," he said simply, and there was no arrogance in it. No assumption of control, just a clear acknowledgement that whatever she had, whatever she knew, it mattered, and that unsettled her more than anything else, because she had spent years convincing herself that it did not, that it was easier to let it go, easier to become someone else. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice quieter now, more honest, and Ethan paused for a moment, as if considering the question more seriously than she expected. "Because I have seen a lot of talent," he said, "and I have seen a lot of people pretend to have it, but I have never seen someone hide it this deliberately." The words landed differently than she expected, not like praise, not like pressure, but like recognition, and Lily looked down at the papers again, her mind drifting despite herself, tracing lines, calculations, possibilities, and for a brief second, she allowed herself to think the way she used to see the full picture instead of just the surface, and when she spoke again, it was softer, almost reluctant. "It is not just one mistake," she said, her finger moving slightly across the page, indicating a second inconsistency, then a third, subtle connections that built on each other, things most people would overlook, and Ethan did not interrupt, did not react. He just listened, watched, as she slowly, almost unconsciously, stepped back into a part of herself she had tried to forget. And when she finally stopped, pulling her hand back like she had crossed a line, the room felt different, quieter, heavier with something real, something undeniable. Ethan leaned back slightly, a small, almost imperceptible nod forming, not of surprise, but of confirmation, like he had just proven something he already believed. "You did not lose this," he said, his voice low, certain, and Lily swallowed, shaking her head just slightly. "No," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "I just stopped using it." And for the first time since this started, the truth was not something she avoided. It was something she said out loud, and once it was said, there was no taking it back. "You think stopping was a choice, do not you?" Ethan said quietly, his voice no longer carrying that measured distance it once had, but something closer now, something that sounded almost personal, and Lily felt it immediately, the shift in tone, the way the conversation had moved from observation to something deeper, something she had been trying to avoid since the moment he first noticed her. She stood from the chair slowly, stepping back from the table as if physical distance could help her regain control of the situation, her arms crossing instinctively, a barrier she had built over time. It was, she replied, but even as the words left her mouth, they felt incomplete, like a version of the truth that was easier to say than the whole thing. Ethan watched her for a moment, not challenging her directly, but not accepting it either. People do not walk away from something they are that good at without a reason, he said, and this time there was no test in his voice, no strategy. Just a quiet certainty that made it harder for her to deflect. Lily turned slightly toward the window, her gaze drifting to the skyline, the city stretching out in every direction, full of opportunities she had once believed would be hers. And for a moment, she let herself feel it, the weight of what she had left behind. My father built things, she said finally, her voice softer now, less guarded, like the story had been waiting just beneath the surface. Hospitals, schools, projects that were supposed to last longer than him. She paused briefly, her reflection faint in the glass, and then one mistake, one project that failed, and everything collapsed. Ethan remained silent, letting her continue, understanding that this was not something to interrupt. Not because he was wrong, she added, but because someone higher up needed someone to blame. Her jaw tightened slightly, the memory still sharp even after all this time. We lost everything, contracts, reputation, our home, and suddenly the only thing people saw when they looked at his work was failure. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just slightly as she continued. I was 2 years away from finishing top of my class, and every professor kept telling me I was going to be better than him, that I would rebuild what he lost. She let out a small, humorless breath, but I could not even pay tuition anymore, and he could not even look at a blueprint without seeing what happened. Ethan stepped a little closer, not enough to invade her space, just enough to show he was still there, still listening. So you stopped, he said gently, and Lily nodded once, her eyes still on the city. I did not just stop, she corrected quietly. I made sure no one ever expected anything from me again. The words hung there, heavy and final, because that had been the real decision, not just to leave, but to disappear, to become someone no one would question, no one would pressure, no one would compare. Ethan absorbed that in silence, his expression shifting slightly, not with pity, but with understanding, the kind that did not try to fix what had already happened. You are still doing it, he said after a moment, and Lily frowned slightly, turning back toward him. Doing what? She asked, and Ethan gestured lightly toward the papers on the table. Building, solving, seeing what others miss, he said. You just do it where no one is looking. Lily looked at the documents again, then back at him, and for a second, she did not have an answer, because he was right. She had not stopped, not completely. She had just hidden it so well that even she had started to believe it was gone. That is different, she said finally, but her voice lacked the conviction it once had, and Ethan did not argue, did not push, he simply nodded once, as if acknowledging her words without agreeing with them. And in that quiet moment, something shifted again, not in the room, not in the situation, but in her, because for the first time, she was not just being seen, she was being understood, and that was far more dangerous than anything she had tried to avoid, because understanding had a way of bringing things back to life, whether she was ready for it or not. Then do not hide behind it anymore, Ethan said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the room feel smaller, more focused, like everything had narrowed down to this one moment. And Lily felt it immediately, the shift from understanding to expectation, subtle but undeniable. She straightened slightly, her arms uncrossing as if her body reacted before her mind did. You think it is that simple, she replied, her tone sharper now, not defensive, but grounded in something real, something he had not lived through. Ethan did not respond right away. Instead, he walked toward the window, looking out at the city below, hands resting lightly in his pockets, as if giving her space without stepping away from the conversation. No, he said after a moment. I think it is exactly as complicated as you are making it. Lily let out a quiet breath, shaking her head as she stepped away from the table, putting distance between herself and the papers, the designs, the version of her he was trying to pull back into existence. You do not understand what happens when people expect something from you, and then you fail, she said, her voice quieter now, but heavier. It does not just go away. It stays, it follows you, it defines you. Ethan turned back toward her, his expression steady, but there was something more direct in it now, something that did not soften the truth. And you think hiding protects you from that? He asked, not accusing, just asking the question she had been avoiding. Lily hesitated, her gaze dropping for a second before lifting again. It keeps me from becoming it, she answered, and for a moment, that was all there was, silence, the kind that was not empty, but full of everything neither of them had said yet. Ethan nodded slowly, as if he understood the logic, even if he did not agree with the conclusion. Then he stepped back toward the table, picking up the folder and closing it carefully. There is a board review tomorrow, he said, his tone shifting slightly, more formal now, more aligned with the world he came from. This project is at risk because of those errors, and no one on my team has seen what you saw. Lily frowned slightly, the change in direction catching her off guard. That is not my responsibility, she said quickly, the boundary instinctively returning. Ethan looked at her, not challenging, not dismissing, just clear. You are right, he said. It is not. And that made her pause, because she had expected resistance, pressure, something that would force her to push back harder. But instead he simply accepted it, and that left something open, something unresolved. Then why are you telling me? She asked, and Ethan held her gaze for a second before answering. Because I am not going to ask you to fix it, he said. I am going to let you decide if you want to. The words settled differently than anything he had said before. Not a test, not an offer wrapped in expectation, just a choice, real and unforced. And Lily felt it immediately, the weight of it, because it was easier to refuse something that was demanded than something that was given freely. She looked at the folder in his hands, then back at him, her mind already working despite herself, already seeing the problems, the solutions, the outcomes, and she hated that it still came so naturally, hated that part of her had never really stopped. If I say no, she said slowly, then nothing changes. Ethan nodded once. Nothing changes, he confirmed, and for a moment, that was exactly what she wanted. Nothing changing, no expectations, no risks, no chance of becoming the person who could fail again. But then she thought about the project, the people who would trust it, the outcome that could be better if someone just paid attention, if someone just cared enough to fix it. And she realized that was the part she could not ignore, the part that had never been about expectations or reputation, but about doing things right, even when no one was watching. She looked at him again, her expression quieter now, more certain. And if I say yes, she asked, and Ethan's answer came without hesitation, then you stop pretending you are not who you are. And that was it. No promises, no guarantees, just the truth. And Lily stood there for a long second, the choice in front of her clearer than it had been in years, because this time it was not about proving anything to anyone else. It was about deciding whether she was ready to face what she had walked away from. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she stepped back toward the table, her hand reaching for the folder, not because he asked her to, but because she chose to. You do not get to decide who I am in that room, Lily said quietly the next day, her voice steady but carrying something stronger now, something that had not been there before, as she stood just outside the glass doors of the boardroom on the top floor. The same floor she had stepped onto the night before, but everything felt different now, sharper, more real, because this time she was not here by accident, she was here by choice. And inside the room, voices moved in controlled tones, executives discussing numbers, timelines, risks, all of it sounding confident, but slightly off, like something underneath was unstable. Ethan stood beside her, not in front, not leading, just there, his presence steady but not overwhelming. I am not deciding anything, he replied calmly. You are. And Lily glanced at him for a brief second, then back at the door, her reflection faint in the glass, still wearing the same uniform, still looking like someone who did not belong in that room. And yet she knew that what she saw was not the full truth anymore. She took a slow breath, then pushed the door open, the conversation inside pausing almost immediately, heads turning, confusion flickering across faces that did not recognize her. A cleaner stepping into a boardroom was not part of the expected order, and Lily felt the weight of that instantly. the quiet judgment, the silent question of why she was there. But this time she did not lower her gaze. She walked forward, each step, measured, controlled, until she reached the end of the table where the blueprints and reports were laid out. And for a moment, no one spoke, until one of the senior managers cleared his throat. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," he said, polite but dismissive, already preparing to correct the situation. But Ethan stepped in then, not loudly, not forcefully, just enough to shift the balance. "There is no misunderstanding," he said, his tone calm, but carrying authority that did not need to be proven. "She is here because she sees what we missed." The room fell silent again. But this time it was different, not confusion, but attention, redirected, focused, and Lily felt it, the shift from being invisible to being seen, fully, openly. And there was no hiding from it now. Her hand moved toward the documents almost automatically, but she paused for half a second, grounding herself, reminding herself that this was her choice, not something she was being pushed into. And then she began, her voice steady, clear, explaining the inconsistencies, the structural risks, the chain of small errors that built into something larger, something dangerous if left uncorrected. She did not rush, did not over-explain. She simply spoke the way she used to, direct, precise, confident in what she knew. And as she spoke, the room changed, skepticism fading into focus, then into something else entirely, respect, not given freely, but earned in real time, through clarity and understanding. And when she finished, there was a moment of silence that felt longer than it actually was, before one of the executives leaned forward, looking at the documents again with new eyes. "Why was this not caught earlier?" he asked, not to her, but to the team, and Lily stepped back slightly, the conversation moving forward without her, as it should, because this was never about taking over, it was about being heard, and for the first time in years, she had been. Ethan watched her quietly as she moved away from the table, not stepping in to take credit, not turning the moment into something bigger than it needed to be, just allowing it to exist as it was, real and earned. And when the meeting continued without her, she walked out of the room the same way she had entered, calm, steady, but different now. Something inside her no longer hidden, no longer waiting. And as the door closed behind her, she let out a slow breath, not relief, not fear, just something quieter, something closer to acceptance, because the truth was no longer something she had to protect. It was something she had chosen to live with. And as she stepped back into the hallway, Ethan joined her a moment later, not saying anything at first, just standing there beside her. And after a few seconds, she spoke, her voice softer now but certain. "I am still not who I was before," she said, and Ethan nodded once, not disagreeing. "No," he replied, "you are not." And there was no disappointment in it, no expectation that she had to return to something she had left behind, just a quiet understanding that who she was now mattered just as much. Lily looked ahead, the hallway stretching forward, familiar but no longer the same, and for the first time, she did not feel the need to disappear into it, because she knew now that being seen did not mean being defined by the past. It meant having the choice to decide what came next, and this time, she was not walking away from it.